But it's interesting that he's an insider and he's saying, in a nutshell, that Black lives do not matter to Black Lives Matter. So, Sam, do you believe that Black lives matter to Black Lives Matter?
Thank you for tuning in to the Removing Barriers podcast. I'm Jay.
And I'm MCG.
And we're attempting to remove barriers so we can all have a clear view of the cross.
This is episode 56 of the Removing Barriers podcast. And this is the sixth in the series of Black Lives Matter and its mission. The first in the series was episode 3, Black Lives Matter, an introduction to the movement. The second one, episode 4, Black Lives Matter, the destruction of the nuclear family. The third was episode 8, Black Lives Matter, the LGBTQIA+ movement. The fourth episode in this series was episode 27, Black Lives Matter, the Marxist movement. And the fifth was Black Lives Matter and the police. Those episodes can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and most places where podcasts can be found. And the Removing Barriers podcast can also be found now on Amazon Music. In this episode, we'll be looking at Black Lives Matter, the hypocritical movement. And co-hosting with us is Sam. Sam is no stranger to the Removing Barriers podcast. Sam, welcome back. And thank you for joining us once again.
MCG, Jay, it's a pleasure.
Great. It's always nice to have you on, man.
Yeah, I was kind of jealous when I heard that you had another, I'm trying to think what you call him, somebody else on the podcast, right, who, I forget which episode it was. He actually was able to be at the headquarters, and I was in town just the other week, but it was a very quick trip, so I wasn't able to swing by.
That's okay. That was brother David Somerdoff. He was actually at headquarters recording with us. So, yeah, you're welcome to come at headquarters anytime you're in town and we can record something.
Sounds good.
Make sure you bring the kids, though. I won't let you in my house unless you bring the kids.
It'll have to be a few months because we're about to have another one.
Well, congratulations.
Oh, congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
All right, Mrs. Samlek, let's get into it. Black Lives Matter made some $90+ million in 2020, especially after the death of George Floyd. Patrisse Cullors, a co-founder of BLM, who has since stepped down from the movement, and the one who claimed to be a trained Marxist, purchased properties for millions of dollars. In your opinion, was that hypocritical, knowing her views?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Is it hypocritical? I was looking at, first of all, you mentioned, I'm not sure whether you said 19 million?
90.
Okay, yeah, I was about to say, because what I saw was 90, which is incredible, right? That's a lot of money. Is it hypocritical? Wow. Being that they're not only an organization that are supposedly meant to encourage equality and equal treatment of Black people and white people, but it sounds funny to me to even think that because they seem to be only about Black people on the outside and not about treating white people right. But being that they claim to be a group that want to help promote Black people, I think that there is some hypocrisy. I don't know if it's that obvious at first glance. So the reason why I say I think there's some hypocrisy is they say that they're trying to promote Black people and the less privileged, in particular the less privileged Black community. But they are very privileged, and they're very privileged when they exploit, if you will, the bad feelings that Black people have. So a lot of Black people, I know many of them right outside of Mobile even, that feel like the white man's always out to get them, and they just feel like that they're in a bad spot for whatever reason. And many of them are in a bad spot, but many of them feel like they're being taken advantage of by the white guy. And I feel like they're also being taken advantage of by these quote unquote Black liberation groups, not just BLM, but before that, the old school groups like Jesse Jackson, and his Rainbow Push Coalition. It seems like he would always go to these organizations. I think Nike as an example, and I wish I had looked this up, but if I remember correctly, Jesse Jackson would go to different organizations and say, hey, I'm going to say that y'all aren't treating Black people right unless y'all contribute to my Rainbow Push Coalition,
Oh, wow.
Yeah. In fact, I should look that up right now. But anyway, I think that BLM has a similar business model, It's kind of like, if you give money to our foundation, then we'll let you off the hook. But if you don't, then we're going to claim that you're racist. And I think that's a way that BLM a similar way that BLM operates. They profit off of Black people suffering, But yeah, is it hypocritical? Yeah, I think that is either hypocritical or antithetical to their outward position that they want to help Black people, but yet they make money when Black people aren't doing well. In addition to that, they're a Marxist organization, right? And I have a real problem with them saying that they aren't for capitalism. They aren't for people making money, but they want to share the money equitably. But then they go off and they make millions, right? We talk about Patrisse Cullors, and she buys these expensive properties. I think one was $3.2 million. And then I want to say she bought a $1.2 million property in LA. That sounds like a pretty nice house, but she's a communist. She's supporting, or at least she's saying that she's a communist. Oh, did I say 1.2? I'm just looking at it. It's a $1.4 million home in an LA neighborhood, Topanga Canyon, I guess, just outside of Malibu. So it's like they're trying to talk about sharing the money. Marxism, I guess, is the whole idea, supposedly, right, where you share the money equally between the haves and the have-nots. But it doesn't sound to me like she's really sharing that money unless she's inviting all of the other less privileged people to live in her $1.4 million home outside of Malibu. I don't do that.
How about you, Jay?
I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit here. Okay. So is it hypocritical for a Marxist living within a capitalist system to buy a house?
Well, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, because $1 million sounds like a ton of money to us. Because like our homes are in the hundreds of thousands, hers is in the millions, and we're thinking, oh goodness, that's a lot of money. She went and bought a house over in like Malibu. And from the pictures that we've seen, that's to me, it doesn't look like a house I would pay 1 million for. So what should she have done in order to not be, or at least not present herself to be so hypocritical? Because from what I understand, for the tenets of Marxism, it's everything is owned by everyone, right? Or am I wrong about that?
I'm going to get to that. This is how I look at it, because you have a point in LA, a $1.4 million home is maybe a $400,000 home in Jacksonville, Florida. So
right,
we can say, hey, the price of real estate is based on three things: location, location, location. Mm-hmm. So in Topanga Canyon, a $1.3 million home, quite honestly, and I'm not rich, but quite honestly, I think my home looked better than hers. And I didn't pay anything close to $1.4 million for my home, or at least I'm not going to pay that much for it. So is it hypocritical for her to do that? This is why I would say yes. Because if you look at the neighborhood where she bought the home, it is 1.2% or something like that Black. And I think it was like 90-something% white. Why is it that she didn't go and buy a home where the Black people live in LA, where she grew up? She grew up someplace in California close to LA. Why didn't she buy a home there? I think she has a home there, but she has multiple homes. So my thing is that I think it's personally hypocritical, because you're condemning the white people. You're condemning supposedly what they're doing to us, but then you're going to live among them. Why not stay and live among Black people? The same people you want to pull up. The same people you say want to stop.
That's why I think it's hypocritical.
Why not share the wealth there?
That's why I think it's hypocritical.
But you're going to buy multiple homes. You're trying to buy vacation home in the Bahamas. I think that's definitely hypocritical. But it comes down to this, because she's the one who claimed that she and another of the founder are trained Marxists. But
yeah.
Alicia Garza and Opal Tometi. All of them are trained Marxists.
How does she look at herself? Is she a bourgeoisie or the proletariat? Because it depends. If she sees herself as a member of the bourgeoisie, I guess, well, it's still here.
Well, see, that's the problem with Marxism and communism and all of them, right? It's, oh yeah, we all need to share all of our resources, share the land, share the money, share the wealth. And what it ends up being is all of that ends up in the hands of a few, while everyone else is pretty much starving to death and bereft of everything. For example, you have a lot of Black celebrities who have the same sentiments as Black Lives Matter, but they're profiting from capitalism. And then when they lift themselves up out of their poverty, they don't go back and live in their neighborhoods. Number one, they can't because their own would eat them alive. They're not even safe in their own neighborhoods, in their own areas. And so there's the hypocrisy there. I mean, if you're benefiting from the capitalism, if you're benefiting from the system that's in place, and all you want to do is tear it down and install something, we'll say socialism, what happens is you're already at the top. You're already bourgeoisie. And so when you install your system, you're set, but no one else is able to pull themselves up because Marxism, socialism, communism, none of that allows for that. So there's the hypocrisy. They're able to better themselves while making it practically impossible for others to better themselves. And then they're profiting off of the people that they're supposedly helping. So I don't think it's hypocritical because she bought a $1 million house. You know, I think perhaps where the real problem is how it negatively affects everyone she claims to be helping, but that she's actually profiting off of.
I guess I agree with you there. I don't think it's hypocritical for her to buy a $1.4 million house. I did take a quick peek at it. I think it looks all right. I'm surprised she spent 1.4 on it.
Exactly.
Well, his location is in LA. Come on.
I would not have paid $1 million.
A shack on the beach in LA is $1 million. So,
well, should we even care that she made all that kind of money and made her fame through? Like, should we care? We're critical of BLM. Why should we, as people who are critical of BLM, care that she made all of this money and that she's purchasing all of these things and that she made her fame through Black Lives Matter? Why should we even care?
Well, you know, I think that she needs to put her money where her mouth is, right? So she says that she's for Marxism, right? Or she's trained in Marxism. She's promoting Marxism.
Yep.
And that means that people need to share the wealth, right? You have the haves and the have-nots, and those who have need to share with those who do not have. And so if that's what she believes in, then she needs to actually do it. So I don't have a problem with her buying a house all by itself, although I do have a problem with where the money came from. But I don't have a problem with her spending $1.4 million on a house. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, right? But where I do have the problem is she says that people need to share their wealth with those who don't have. And I'm not aware of her sharing her millions. I'm assuming that she has more than 1.4 if she bought a $1.4 million house. And I believe she also made a $3-point-something million purchase elsewhere. Well, yeah, she has several homes. So if she has all that, why isn't she sharing that money or sharing the property that she has? And she might be, but I'm not hearing about it anywhere, you know? All I'm hearing about is where she's acquiring properties and acquiring wealth, but I'm not hearing anything about her sharing it. That's where the hypocrisy comes in. And it's kind of a biblical principle, not like she cares about this. If you're going to point at somebody else's problems, right? First, pull the mote out of your eye before you point at the splinter in somebody else's. And she's saying, look at these people. They're greedy. Look at these capitalists. They acquire wealth. They oppress people, so forth and so on. They don't share their wealth with other people. That's what she's arguing, you know, but I don't see her sharing either. So if she wants to say that other people need to share their wealth, she needs to make an example, you know, and do it herself.
Yeah, and I would say this as well, because she did a number of interviews and she said that she didn't make any money from Black Lives Matter. Over her time at Black Lives Matter, she only made about $120,000 in a span of 5 years or something like that, or whatever amount of time she was at the head. But it was a length of time and she only made $120,000. She made her money through, I think she teach and also through books and stuff like that. And I personally don't have a problem with her making the money. If she makes millions of dollars because of her fame through BLM, I have no problem with her making money. As a black man, I'm against the Black Lives Matter movement because I think it's a anti-black movement. I think it is a anti-biblical movement. I think it's a really dangerous movement for America, whether you're black or white. But I don't have a problem with her making the money. So should we care that she make money through BLM? I don't really care that she makes money. But I will go back to this. As a public figure, she seeks to destroy the capitalistic system that's in America, but yet she makes money through it. It's like AOC at her store making millions of dollars selling her merchandise and don't realize that she actually using the capitalistic system that she wants to break down to make that money. So it's the same thing here. The capitalistic system helped her get out of the state she was born in terms of she was born, I think it was single parent. She was born in the cities. She grew up, you know, pretty much in poverty. And she worked hard and she pulled her way out of it. Great. Go and tell everyone how to do it. But at the same time, you're breaking down a system that you flourish in. And that's where I'm looking at it and say, do I care that she makes money? No. But I do care that she's trying to break down the system that help her to succeed.
That's an interesting point. I guess that makes it all the more troubling, right? Because maybe BLM maybe it isn't helping her make money. I personally think that it is helping her make money. Even if she's not officially making money through BLM, she's now a household name amongst many people, right? They know about her, and you can make money off of that.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, but whatever the matter, she has money somehow, and she has money through a system that she is now attacking, capitalism. And I find that a little troubling too. Whether it's hypocritical or not, it's still troubling because, like you said, she grew up in a bad situation. And there's a lot of other, black folks that are in similar situations. Can even think of my own family, right? Well, my family, they came, on my dad's side, they came over from the islands. And, well, great-grandpa was from the islands. Great-grandma was from a very poor town in Wales, right? They came over to America. They were both black. There's some Welsh mixed in there, but you look at them, you'd say they were black. And they landed in New York, and they ended up living in the projects, right? Not much money. Grandpa, he ends up going off. He starts a family, 6 kids, and one of them being my father, obviously. And he ends up working 3 jobs in our capitalist society, right? But he got us out of the projects and was able to buy a home for $17,000, which, by the way, today is almost $1 million in New Jersey.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. It's a small home, and it really doesn't look like $1 million to me. So that's kind of interesting. I guess that offers a little perspective on her $1.4 million home.
Yep.
But yeah, so he was able to get out of poverty, get all of his children, all 6 of his children, they're in a better spot than he was. None of them are living in government assistance, and several of them have gone to college. Several of them are high-level officials in either the government or in private sector. Actually, a few of them no longer because they've retired, but they did well, And then I was able to benefit from that. I went to college, and then I feel like my kids, right, they are being raised in a situation financially that is way better than what I grew up in. And that was way better than what my dad grew up in, And so we're progressing and we're doing better. I can't complain for anything. We're not hungry. Things are really good. And it's like, if it weren't for capitalism and a capitalist-like society, I wouldn't be in the spot. My kids wouldn't be in the spot. My wife wouldn't be in the spot. She comes from a blue-collar family where money was really tight too. And so, but because of capitalism, we were able to move up. So yes, people don't start in a good spot, but with capitalism, you can work hard and you can get somewhere. And I think she's proven it too, because she started out in a poor situation and she's moved up and she's doing really good, So why is she going to tear down this ladder that other impoverished black people are going to be able to take advantage of? And what's she going to replace it with? Marxism? Marxism has a horrible track record when it comes to helping people move up. It seems like it just takes people and moves them down, And so you may have a decent amount of poor people in capitalism, but if they work hard, they can move up. Whereas in Marxism, it doesn't seem to matter how hard they work. They're still going to go down, and you only have a few people at the very top that do okay,
Marxism looked really good on paper. I don't know if you remember the 2004 Lakers where they had Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal, Gary Payton, and Karl Malone on the team. And this team was all set to win the NBA championship and everything because they had 4 basically of the all-time greats. They went to the NBA finals and they compete against the Detroit Pistons, who they had Chauncey Billups, that guy Prince, they had Rip Hamilton and the other Rasheed Wallace and the other Wallace, I don't remember his first name right this, but with the other Wallace that was the rim protector. How many of those names are household names? Not a lot. These guys weren't superstars in the NBA. And if you go to Gary Payton, Karl Malone, Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal, these are all big names. On paper, you will say, hey, the Lakers going to crush the Detroit Pistons. But no, the Detroit Pistons won the 2004 NBA championship. Why? You don't play things on paper. You don't play each other on paper. You play the sport in real life. The same thing, I think, with Marxism. We don't live on paper. We have to deal with the human nature. And we have to deal with the fact that some people are not going to pull their weight, and some people is not going to want to work as they ought to. So I think that's where Marxism fail in terms of providing, in terms of being a system that people can flourish in, because it doesn't incentivize hard work. And if you expect everybody is going to pull their own weight, it's not going to happen. I have an incentive because I know if I don't work, my family is not going to eat. So I have to go out there and work. Now, if I know whether or not I work or not I'm going to eat, why am I going to go and work that hard? Why am I saving and having emergency fund and trying to protect my family with insurance? Well, I can lean on my fellow man to do it for me. And I think that's where it comes in with this thing with Marxism and their teaching, because they figure it sounds good, it should work. But when you put it to the test in real life, I honestly don't think it's going to work. And I think that the other countries that have tried it have shown us that it doesn't work. You want to go to North Korea? You want to go to Cuba? You want to go to Venezuela? I think there are many, many countries around the world that have shown us that, hey, this doesn't work. And even you say, okay, China might be an exception because China economy is booming. But did you know that 80% of Chinese economy is actually produced by 20% of the people? That 20% is actually allowed to be capitalist. So the 20%...
So 20% capitalism is supporting and pulling the weight of 80%
producing
communism.
80% of the wealth.
Wow.
Can you imagine if China was a capitalist country? So what I'm just saying here is that on paper, this doesn't work. And we have seen examples all around the world where this have been tried.
Well, let me ask you this, because we're not talking about dumb, uneducated people. These are people who have gone to college. These are well-read people. Okay, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. What's that, Sam?
Well-read and smart.
Right, exactly. That's why I kind of hesitated there. But okay, let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say they're well-read and that their intentions are good. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt. If we have the history, we have a proven track record that socialism, Marxism, communism, all these things don't work. Why are they promoting it? Like, why would a Marxist want personal property if, in their paradigm of seeing the world, personally owned property is a bad thing? Why would a Marxist want their own property? Are they trying to have their cake and eat it too? Is that what it is?
I think that may be a part of it, having their cake and eating it as well. Honestly, I don't think they believe what they preach. That's my honest assessment of it. I don't think they believe what they preach. Or they might see themselves as a member of the bourgeoisie class, and therefore, because they're that high up there, that they figure that, hey, I am higher than you or whatever the case may be, so I'm just trying to help you out to live somewhat better, but I don't want to live like you. Do you think Kim Jong-un is starving from hunger? The guy is probably on a diet trying to lose weight. So, the higher up when it comes to Marxism are the ones that benefit. So depends on how they see themselves. But I honestly just believe they just don't believe what they preach. It's more about them. Selfishness is not about others. That's my analysis of it.
Yes, about them not believing what they preach. I think that's a good point. I think it's a very strong possibility that this is just a business venture, really, for them, or a way to profit off the suffering of others. I'm not convinced that they truly care, honestly. And I think it goes back to principles that we're all familiar with. Talk is cheap, When somebody says something, you really shouldn't judge what they're saying or what you think about them and what they're trying to do based off of what they're saying. You need to look at what they're doing. And if you look at what BLM is doing, well, first of all, what are they saying? They're saying that they're trying to liberate Black people, that the wealthy people are taking advantage of them, and they need somebody to help them out, right? Take the poor people and let's take the rich money from the poor people, Black people in particular, because that's what BLM focuses on.
Mm-hmm.
So take money from the wealthy, rich, and I guess maybe they can excuse themselves from hypocrisy because they're saying it's the rich white people that we need to take the money from and get it to the poor Black people. But that being said, this Marxism that they're promoting ultimately takes money from the well-to-do Black people too. When they're trying to promote a government welfare state, that affects all of us. And honestly, I think it affects black people more than it does white people, at least when we look at the really rich class. So you look at folks like Jeff Bezos, he doesn't pay taxes, hardly at all. In fact, many years he pays zero in taxes. He's got over $200 billion. Why isn't he paying taxes on it? Because he knows how to work the system, But with this welfare system, you have a lot of other people that don't have as much money as Bezos and aren't as clever with the tax law. As far as I can tell, I looked into why Bezos doesn't pay. As far as I can tell, he's going about it in a completely legal fashion. It's very clever the way that he's avoiding taxes, and it's interesting to me. I'm going to have to look into it further.
On that point, Sam, the most expensive way to make money in this country is actually to be an employee. So
yeah, I can see that.
Do you think what we know to be crooked people and organizations like, say, Al Sharpton, Black Lives Matter, we might even say many CEOs and leaders of so-called not-for-profit groups, do you think perhaps they've become aware of this and so they're capitalizing on it? So they're like these evil people with, twirling their fingers and they're doing it on purpose? Are they possessed by this ideology that drives them to behave the way they do? And they don't even realize how hypocritical and backwards and counterproductive it actually is. Because, like, for example, Breonna Taylor's mom and Michael Brown's father, remember, Breonna Taylor was the young lady who was killed when cops executed a no-knock warrant and her boyfriend shot in self-defense, or he says he shot in self-defense. They fired back. She got killed. Michael Brown, of course, was the young teenage man who was killed when he tried to take an officer's firearm and the officer shot him in Ferguson. So the parents of those two people have come out in condemnation of Black Lives Matter as frauds. And if I remember the story straight, they hadn't received a dime of support, of funding, or anything from Black Lives Matter. And those dissidents' names are used to galvanize people in support of Black Lives Matter. So I just can't imagine as a human being knowing that you're standing on the graves of these dead Black people and you're galvanizing people against white power, white privilege, white supremacy, etc., and you're not providing any type of material or financial support to the victims or the families of these people. Can you be that personally evil and know what you're doing and do it deliberately anyway? Or do you just kind of buy into this ideology hook, line, and sinker and just don't even realize how hypocritical or, I guess, for lack of a better word, unhelpful you're actually being?
I have a quote here from Tamika Palmer, who is actually Breonna Taylor's mom.
Okay.
She said, "I've never personally dealt with BLM Louisville and personally have found them to be fraud." And Michael Brown's father said, "What kind of movement are we building when we say Black Lives Matter, but the freedom fighters and the families are being left behind? Where is our restitution?" He asks. "We are not begging for a handout. We are coming for what we deserve." He said that to BLM. I think he's asking BLM for like something like $20 million or something like that.
Good night. See, that's that victim mentality, what we deserve. That victim.
Wow. That's an interesting question. I wonder if he's asking for 20 million out of unjust entitlement, or if it's because, going back to the whole hypocrisy thing and profiting off of the plight of others, and in particular, because we're talking about BLM, Black individuals, you look at the family of George Floyd. They don't want BLM. They don't like them. Mm-hmm. George Floyd is how they got most of their press in 2020, and maybe the other family that you're talking about that was requesting $20 million. I think that's a lot. But if BLM is raising lots of money in the name of these families that are victimized, then maybe they do have a legitimate claim to that money, even to the tune of a few million, Keep in mind, Sam, that BLM was started after George Zimmerman was acquitted in Florida shooting of Trayvon Martin. I think that happened in 2012. I think he was acquitted in 2013. I remember this because I got married in 2013, and I remember following the case the few months into my marriage. And it started back then in 2013, but it didn't take traction until Michael Brown was killed by a Ferguson police officer. So Michael Brown is actually what, in a sense, gave BLM legs. Wow. And then if you fast forward to 2020, George Floyd is what gave BLM the body and the power and the political might, in my opinion,
Because George Floyd, even Patrisse Cullors said it wasn't until 2020 that they were in a financial position to do anything. BLM itself, not her, but BLM was in a financial position to do anything. And raking in 90 million, that's what's reported. We have no idea how this money was spent or if that was just the amount that came in. So should Michael Brown parents get $20 million or whatever they're asking for? I honestly don't know. I don't know how their financial structure work. But at the same time, I think Jay has a point. When you're using, and let me say this, BLM only care about dead black men. If you read what we believe, and I have a copy of that, and I'm going to post it on my website so people can see what BLM said, what they believe. They never mention father, and the only time they mention anything about black men is trans black woman. So I mean, a black man who transitioned to be a woman, that's the only thing they mention. In my opinion, they care about the black man when the black man is killed by a police officer, and the police officer has to be white. So should they receive this money? I don't know. But is the life and death of these black folks that give BLM their legs and the body and the might that they have today politically? And I think George Floyd also was a perfect storm because it happened in a presidential year. Trump was in power. It was so much things that was right and ripe for this to happen. Let's say it was Obama who was in power. All this racial stuff wasn't going on. People weren't calling the president racist and all these things. George Floyd, that would have still be bad, but would he have given BLM this much power? I beg to differ.
You know, that's interesting. I know we're talking about BLM, which is a political topic, but I'm not trying to get overly political in this conversation, but I really am perplexed with people arguing that Trump is a racist and that he was bad for black people, right? Because for me, what I've observed has kind of been more evidence to the opposite. And it is funny to me that BLM would be so charged during the term of Trump, you know, when we've had prison reform, you know, and then Trump's been pardoning and excusing or getting people out of prison, granting clemency to many black people that, in my opinion, have been unjustly imprisoned or imprisoned for too long. So I forget the name of the woman, but you had that one woman. Wow. It was Kanye West.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Alice Johnson, I think is her name. She was in prison. Was it for 25 years or for life? It was a long time. I think she had been in prison for 25 years. And I think she had more time to serve for one, as far as I'm aware, one account of selling marijuana. And I think it was her first arrest for that too.
Oh, wow.
And they put her away for over 25 years, you know?
That's crazy.
And like I said, she was going to be in there for even longer. And as far as I understand, Kanye West's wife, I'm forgetting her name off the top of my head. But anyway.
Yeah, her name is
Kim Kardashian. Anyway, she brings it up to Trump. And Trump is like, wow, you know, that doesn't sound right. You know, she shouldn't be in jail for that long. And he got her out, you know. And it's not just that family. There are case after case where that's happened with Trump. Anyway, I'm not trying to promote Trump in this, but looking at it from a BLM standpoint, right? It's amazing to me that BLM would even have any legs in this kind of an environment. We're starting to look at how black folks are being treated, at least in the prison system, and changes were starting to be made, not just by Trump, but by others too. But when you have the very top, the president of the United States looking at this, then you think that this whole appetite for violence and very heated protests, right? You'd think that that appetite should be lessened. And honestly, maybe it is, because you look at George Floyd, right, and his family, and, you know, you have the BLM people when the George Floyd thing happened, they're screaming, I can't breathe, which is, when you think about it, a pretty negative chant, talking about George Floyd being suffocated to death or whatever happened to him. We think maybe a suffocation was part of it, potentially. But with his family, instead of saying, I can't breathe, they said at the funeral, everybody needs to take a breath, right? Let's take a breath for George Floyd. George Floyd, I don't think, was a saint. But anyway, but his family, they seem to want the whole national conversation to calm down a little bit, you know? And unlike BLM that was trying to stir up trouble, it seems to me like George Floyd's family were really decent in how they handled this. Let's everybody calm down. Let's take a breath. let's look at how we can prevent bad things from happening, but let's not get crazy here, you know? And then you look at other families, like you mentioned Breonna Taylor's family, and then you have like
Michael Brown's dad.
You have Lisa Simpson, whose son Richard was killed by an LAPD officer a little bit ago. Anyway, she's not for BLM. She seems to be thinking that they're a fraud too. But you have all these people that have come out, people related to Breonna Taylor. They all seem to be saying that BLM is a fraud. And a lot of them have been asking for more calm down. There may be problems. Let's address them, but we don't need to riot over it. So again, to me, it starts to seem like if the families, they're the ones who lost their loved ones, not BLM, right? BLM says that they're speaking out for these people, but these people say that they don't like what BLM is doing and we should go about it a different way. So it makes me start to wonder what BLM's true intentions are. Are they really about helping these people, or are they trying to stir up a crowd for some other purpose? You know, maybe financial or something else. It doesn't, to me, seem like they're doing this for the people that they claim to be looking out for.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And also, you know, who else agree with that? I believe this guy by the name of Rashad Turner. And he was a founder of, I think it's Minneapolis branch of BLM. He said, I was born in Minneapolis in 1985. We called the North Side home at that time, 18th and Queen. When I was 2 years old, my father was shot and killed. My mother wasn't able to take care of me. So I was raised by my grandparents. They told me that if I was going to change my life for the better, education was the answer. So I worked hard in school. I got into Harlem University and earned a college degree. First in my family, then I went to earn a master's in education from St. Mary's University in Minnesota. I'm living proof that no matter your start in life, quality education is a path to success. I want the same success for our children in our communities. That's why in 2015, I was the founder of Black Lives Matter in St. Paul's. I believe the organization stood for exactly what the name implies. Black lives do matter. However, after a year on the inside, I learned they had little concern for rebuilding black families, and they care even less about improving the quality of education for students in Minneapolis. That was made clear when they publicly denounced charter schools alongside the teachers' union. I was an insider in Black Lives Matter, and I learned the ugly truth. The memorandum on charter schools did not support rebuilding the black family, but it does create barriers to a better education for black children. I resigned for Black Lives Matter after a year and a half, but I didn't quit working to improve black lives and access to great education. Now, I'm not quite sure I would agree with everything that Rashad Turner has said here, but it's interesting that he's an insider and he's saying, in a nutshell, that black lives do not matter to Black Lives Matter. So, Sam, do you believe that black lives matter to Black Lives Matter? But before you answer that, you're listening to the Removing Barriers podcast. We are sitting down with Sam and we are talking about Black Lives Matter, the hypocritical movement. We'll be right back.
Do you have the desire to earnestly contend for the faith which was once delivered unto the saints? Answers in Genesis can help. They provide biblically sound books, CDs, DVDs, homeschooling materials, VBS materials, online courses, digital downloads, and the Answers magazine, and more. Plus, tickets to the Creation Museum and Ark Encounter. Go to the Answers bookstore by clicking the link in the description section below, so you too can be ready to give an answer to anyone who asks the reason of the hope that is in you.
Yeah, do Black Lives matter to Black Lives Matter? I mean, based off of what we've been discussing up to this point, it certainly doesn't look like it, you know? It seems like it's money, power, fame, something in that area that may be motivating them. And at least the folks at the very top. You mentioned this one guy who founded Black Lives Matter in his neighborhood. And it seems like for him, Black lives really do matter, which is why he ended up quitting the organization, because they weren't really helping Black folks. But what's interesting to me, I guess my question is, okay, if it is money that's motivating them or power or fame, where is it coming from? Where is this money coming from? It doesn't seem like the families that are being victimized or that have lost loved ones, right? It doesn't seem like they care for BLM. And, I don't care for BLM. You don't care for BLM. We're Black. We live in the Black community too, right? Okay, so you and I, we're more conservative. My grandparents are lifelong Democrats, and so they are much more connected in that. My granddad, he's worked with Martin Luther King. He doesn't talk about it, but he did. And he's been involved in all the politics in Selma. He's actually even lost a friend himself when he was a teenager. He and some friends were playing. And if we're talking about cops not doing right to Black people, today there may be some problems. Honestly, it doesn't look like much to me. Yes, there certainly are problems, but it doesn't look like much to me compared to what my grandpa had to deal with. Like I was mentioning, he was out in the country with his friends, and I don't really know why. It seems like they just kind of came out of nowhere. There were cops that would go through the country from time to time, and they lived in the country, but this is closer to the Selma side, which has more police and is closer to town and whatnot. Anyway, cops come through, and for whatever reason, my grandpa says there was no reason that he can think of. They saw his friend, and they called him, and he came to the cops, and they stuffed him in the trunk. I guess he wasn't expecting that, but they just stuffed him in the trunk, and days later, his friend is dead, right? They find out he's dead, and it really looks like the cops are the ones who did it, And so that's pretty bad, And it's not like he was in any altercation with the cops or any way to really excuse that. That's really bad. But my grandpa, he asked me, where did these BLM people come from? He's opposed to them, right? And he's actually gone through a lot of stuff, related to oppression of Blacks, And he's really happy going through what he's gone through and then looking at how things are for me and for my children, his great-grandchildren. So I say he's passed away recently, so he's not with us anymore. But when I had a chat with him, BLM was active back then. When I had a chat with him, he's like, where do they come from? He didn't like what they were doing, and he's really happy the way that things have been going for Black people. And he feels like BLM is getting in the way, of the progress that could be further made. BLM is getting in the way directly, right? They're not helping people get ahead. And then they're proposing all these government things that are going to cost poor people more money, because many of the poor people trying to move up into the middle class, when they move up, now they get taxed, and it only pushes them back down, or it takes away their motivation to work. And that's not good. That's hurting Black people. And then on top of that, they're also hurting Black people, my grandfather was mentioning, because they are stirring up bad will between Blacks and other people in America. White people and other races are looking at us funny because, at least if you buy the BLM narrative, if you look at what BLM's doing, they're promoting violence and they're promoting ungratefulness, right? They're complaining about why Black people can't get ahead. And the truth of the matter is Black people have been getting ahead. Yes, there's a lot of people in poverty, but it's better today. If you want to, if you're a Black person and you want to get ahead, you can get ahead, Whereas back in my granddad's day, you might be able to get ahead, but it was really hard, and some of you would end up dead like his friends, So that's really a hard time. And we're not experiencing that today, not at the level like what my granddad was experiencing. Wow. I didn't answer your question. What is motivating BLM? One of the things that I wonder is if BLM is being taken advantage of by China, right? And maybe they're receiving funding or other aid from China to divide this country. And so I looked up a few articles and I see other people positing the same question. Is China behind what BLM is doing? And it seems like there is indeed some sort of connection. There were several articles that I saw, one from MSNBC, and one from a conservative site, both of them saying that BLM is affiliated with Chinese charities, if you will, and other Chinese organizations.
The Chinese are communists, so I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. So they would certainly have that in common. But then it makes me start to wonder how much, right? They're associated with the Chinese. Are the Chinese paying them to cause all this trouble? What's the connection? I don't know the answer to that. But to me, I'm starting to think this looks like a profiting operation. I think they're probably profiting off of black folks or other people that are donating to BLM. I'm a developer, right? I go onto websites for different development technologies, Electron.js. It's a really useful technology. I'm trying to think of an app that uses Electron. Discord. I don't know if you're familiar with the Discord app. It's like a chat app. It's kind of like Skype, really, but it's more gamer-centric. With Discord, they use Electron, so it's a tool, and that's used for a lot of people. Anyway, if you go to Electron's site, they say, hey, we believe that Black Lives Matter. Click here to contribute to BLM, right? And I see this on a lot of tech sites where they're like, Black Lives Matter, contribute to BLM. And so I think they may be getting money off of that. And it may be developers stereotypically. And I work in the field, so I do know a lot of them are white, right? And a lot of them seem to want to assuage their white guilt, quote unquote. They feel guilty for being privileged and not helping poor people and in particular black people. And so I think that BLM makes money off of that, right? Where does that money go? I don't know. It probably goes into their various houses, right, for their executives. But I also wonder if they're making money from China. It really does look to me like this operation is about money primarily, the more I think about it. And I think some of it also happens to do with promoting Marxism, and they're getting money from China, I would imagine, too. They're certainly associated with China. And so, yeah, what does China have to offer? Typically, it seems like they have money and fame. You look at Senna, I'm starting to ramble here, but you look at Senna, you look at Dwayne Rock Johnson, you look at LeBron James, they all are tied into China. And if anybody around them says anything against China, I believe Senna said something that China didn't like, right? Then you see them begging China and pleading with them. Senna even spoke to them in Chinese, trying to make them happy again, And LeBron James, he had somebody around him, somebody affiliated with him, who said something against, I believe it was like the slave labor and other bad things in China. Even the communism, he spoke out against the communism in China. And then LeBron James comes out and says something to the order of, some people are kind of ignorant, referring to the guy who was with him. And please, China, don't take what they're saying seriously. They just don't know, what communism and what China's society is all about, But why is it that Senna said what he said? Why did he apologize so badly? Why is LeBron James apologizing to China for what one of his people said? I think it's because ultimately, when you look at it, most of the money that the NBA gets comes from China. Yeah. They make more money in China than they do in the United States. If you look at Senna and Dwayne Rock Johnson, they're in Hollywood. Where does most of Hollywood money come from? China. And I think you look at BLM. Probably if you were to find out where a lot of BLM's money comes from, my guess is it comes from China. And so I think these executives are motivated by Chinese money as well as the money that they happen to get from us, too. I don't know why we give them any money. And so I think they're motivated by the money and maybe a little bit by the fame. But ultimately, there's a puppet master behind these people. And it's starting to me to look like China is one of those puppet masters, Yeah. So, wow, this just got deep, I guess.
I think there might be some truth to that. In today's climate, the difference between a conspiracy theory and actual truth is about 6 weeks, maybe a month or two. Because people who would say, oh, China's behind BLM, and they'll vehemently deny, oh, no, that's not true. And the investigations are carried out and things come out in the media and things come out in other investigations. And then you realize, oh, it probably was true, because why else, when the United States, particularly under Trump, was trying to take a tough stance with China, particularly during the trade war and everything. And China would repeatedly use the talking points of Black Lives Matter and the history of racism and segregation and everything in this country in order to point at America and say, see, you're not as great as you think you are. You've got this in your history. And so China has already shown ties to, if not outright funding, at least stoking the fires of. It's in their best interest for the ire of Black Lives Matter to remain stoked. It benefits them because that gives them something to point at the U.S. about and, thumb their noses and do whatever it is they want to do. Meanwhile, ignoring all of the atrocities that they're guilty of. So, maybe last year or maybe before the riots last year, I would have said, oh, no, China, no, tendrils don't reach that deep. No way they could be supporting Black Lives Matter. But now I'm kind of like, well, I can see it. I would be more likely to believe it than not. So to me, Black Lives Matter is an organization that doesn't care about Black lives, even though their name says Black Lives Matter. They're using Black people. They're standing on the graves of dead Black people and using the hurt feelings of living Black people to help themselves become the ruling class or the bourgeoisie. And they're basically a capitalist organization masquerading as Marxist. I would say it's the worst form of capitalism that takes advantage of the poor and the underrepresented and all these different things. But as much as they talk about being trained Marxists and all this sort of thing, they are operating like any capitalist organization would.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Going back real quick, I mentioned that there was an article from MSN.com, right? So that's hardly, typically you would think that's liberal news, hardly a bastion of conservative-sided news, if you will. It's definitely got a more liberal slant to it. But they have an article that came out September 15, 2020. And the article says, BLM co-founder lobbying wing funded by pro-communist China group. So this BLM co-founder, he goes to Washington, pretty much. He, she, I'm not sure whether it's a guy or a girl. But this founder, they go to Washington and they lobby for certain policies in Washington. And their lobbying is funded, according to MSN, by pro-communist group from China, and it goes on. So it's Alicia Garza, so I guess that's a girl, partnered with a pro-Chinese Communist Party group to fund its lobbying operations in the United States. That's the very first line in this article. And then they go on and they give a history of how these Chinese communists and this BLM co-founder. So it's technically not BLM, but this is a woman who's connected to BLM.
Yeah, she was one of the co-founders, like you said. It was Patrisse Cullors, Alicia Garza, and Opal Tometi. So absolutely, yeah. Yeah,
so you can definitely see there's a connection by association and there's funding, to one of these. So
yeah, when in doubt, follow the money, yeah?
Yeah. And then I guess here's the other question, right? So, okay, she may not be part of BLM now, but would China be interested in her if she wasn't affiliated with BLM in the past? Or maybe even still to this day? I would argue that they probably wouldn't see much value in her, except for the fact that she's connected with BLM.
Yeah, the same question can be asked. Would the Ukraine be interested in Hunter Biden if he wasn't the son of Joe Biden?
Joe Biden, yeah.
So, definitely power and politics and all these things come into play here, because if China can pay you to go and lobby the government for something, why not? Why not?
You have to reconsider with Hunter Biden because he's the author of world-class art. I don't know if you've seen, it's like a blue blob with white powder on top. But I would pay, $500,000 for that. That looks really good.
Why wouldn't that?
Sarcasm drips.
Why wouldn't what Alicia Garza did, why wouldn't that be considered treason? Considering everything that Black Lives Matter has accomplished in this country, to upset peace, to upset relations between the so-called races, the riots, people have died, people have lost their businesses, millions of dollars in damages, Chop Chaz, that whole debacle fiasco was all flamed and started and fueled by Black Lives Matter. So to have a founder working with a Chinese group in order to subvert America, which is basically what it is, why would that not be considered treason?
Treason is probably too strong of a word there. So I don't know, but
okay. So Black Lives Matter and defund the police are closely connected, but because of the political disruption as well, maybe.
Yeah, but if they're paying us to lobby the government, we have a First Amendment right to lobby the government. Then
I see.
I wouldn't take it as far as treason. It looks more dirty and unethical to me than to say treason, but that's just my 2 cents on it. Should she be working with the Chinese people or the Chinese government? Well, we can say one, we can say two, because where does Walmart get most of their merchandise? Where does most of the stuff that we use in the U.S. are manufactured? They're manufactured in China, so in some of them might be in some other Asian countries, but a lot of these things happen in China. And it's all a part of the game, the political game, I would say. So I wouldn't necessarily dwell too much on that because, at this point it's a conspiracy. We can't prove it one way or the other unless she come out or they had evidence to come out and say, hey, yes, this is provable that she did this and she was a part of this. So to me, tying everything back, do Black Lives Matter to Black Lives Matter? Absolutely not, because I just don't see the evidence that they care about me or my kids and they would consider us as being black. And I do think, as Jay said, that definitely I think Black Lives Matter is actually a capitalistic organization saying they're Marxists when they don't practice anything, quite honestly, in terms of their money, the wealth that they have gained, like a Marxist would or should in that sense. But my question is, why is the hypocrisy of the movement so hard for its followers to see? Why do you think that, Sam? Why do you think it's so hard for others that are following them? We have one here, Rashad Turner, who actually saw it and said, hey, this is hypocritical, I'm out of here. But why is it that we don't see a lot more people turning? We have Tamika Palmer, Breonna Taylor mom, and others that are turning and say, hey, they're fraud. But we're not seeing a whole lot of people turning and say against them. Why do you think that is the case?
So big question in my mind is how many people, for lack of a better word, how many people have defected from BLM? I don't really know the answer to that. And then I'm trying to think, well, how would we know? And we would find out through the news. We would certainly know if we heard it, right, in the mainstream media. Or I'm trying to think how else we would know. Through social media. But a lot of these organizations, censor, they want the narrative that BLM is good, And so we won't hear, I don't think, much about the ugly side of BLM. There may be a lot that are leaving. I don't know. That's a good question. That's something I would love to investigate further.
Yeah, I've seen some polls where the numbers of supporters go up and down. And of course, after stuff like George Floyd and stuff like that, the numbers of support went way up. And then usually it stay up for a little bit, then it drop way down. So definitely it goes up and down, depends on what's happening politically. So I think one of the reasons why they can't say it is politics. Another reason why is the media. As you said, I think the media sometimes report BLM always in this good light because it's this black and white stuff. They don't want to come across as not supporting them. And I think a lot of companies and a lot of businesses donated to BLM and put stuff on their website and stuff in their windows of their business as supporter of BLM just because they didn't want the mob to come after them. So I think it's hard to judge if they truly support BLM or not because you figure, I live in Seattle. My business is downtown Seattle. Why not put a Black Lives Matter support banner in my window so when the mob come along that street, they don't break my window and steal my stuff? That was some of the things that I was reading online where people are saying, hey, we have this sign up just because we don't want the mob to come and destroy our business. So I think politics definitely going there. I think there's a level of fear. I think the media has to do with it. I think spiritual blindness has a lot to do with it as well because we are looking to BLM to be the answer to the problems that they're seeing. And some of these problems might be legitimate. Some of these problems might be real. And many of them might not be, but some of them might be real. And I think another thing that, and this might be tied into politics, but wokeness. So why they're not seeing it? I think there's a multitude of factors where politics, media, spiritual blindness, wokeness, and fear all come into play here and say, hey, let's support the mob because the mob is going to come after us. I think that's one of the reasons.
Earlier in the conversation, we were talking about how Rashad Turner called out BLM for being frauds and that he vowed to continue fighting for the unique challenges facing the Black community, but without BLM, because he did not want to be associated with such a fraudulent organization. And I thought about how there are people on the ground and people who have dedicated their lives to addressing some real problems facing the Black community. And they are between a rock and a hard place because BLM could give them the exposure that they need in order to galvanize their work and get more done. But at the same time, they're being taken advantage of. Black Lives Matter is completely antithetical to what they're actually doing and accomplishing in the Black community. And so I thought about these activists, the real ones, the ones that no one knows about, the ones that are laboring day in, day out, and no one knows about them doing actual good work for the community. They get marginalized and no one notices their good work. And a fraudulent organization like Black Lives Matter gets all of the glory, as it were. So there are legitimate issues and legitimate crises in the Black community that really need to be addressed. But everyone seems to be turning to Black Lives Matter. And I think what exacerbates the problem is that corporate America may not necessarily support Black Lives Matter, but in order to appease the masses and in order to keep their brand from being labeled as racist, they'll go ahead and support them, giving them more validity and more power that they wouldn't otherwise have if these companies weren't backing them up. And so my question is, in light of all of the legitimate issues going on in the Black community that still need to be addressed, is Black Lives Matter the answer? Why are we turning to Black Lives Matter as though they are the answer? And what is the right answer?
So what is the right answer? You know, this is not the Bible, but I think it's based off of biblical principles. Alyssa and I were singing a patriotic song, right? And part of the tune goes, "Crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea," right? And I guess for me, my thought is turning back towards God. America's become increasingly heathen, you know, and with our increasingly bad behavior, we're aborting a lot of babies these days. Actually, you know, the tide is actually turning on that topic. So up until recently, abortion has just been going up, 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 and up. But I want to say late teens, 2018, so like 2017 or so, I think it started to turn the other way. And I think abortion statistics are starting to go down. Pre-COVID abortion statistics. I'm not so sure after COVID. But, you know, pornography and many other bad things are becoming an increasingly big issue in America. We have a lot of people that aren't married. They live together. They're not married. We have LGBTQ seeming to explode. Again, a lot of our opinion as to how popular things are based off of what we see in the news, and the news does have an agenda. So maybe it's not exactly as we think it is. But anyway, it seems like a lot of these things that we shouldn't be doing are increasing. And with our removing ourselves more and more from God, I think that the way we treat each other, right? The way Black folks treat each other, the way that Black and white people treat each other, it's going to degrade, because instead of looking at what does God want me to do, how does God want me to treat these people, we're looking at what is best for me. You know, we become selfish, you know, and we start to see some of that selfishness manifested. You know, BLM, they say, oh, well, we're trying to stop the greed that's hurting Black people, stop the selfishness. But, you know, their behavior indicates that they themselves are selfish and acting in their own best, what they think is their own best interest. And so I don't think that we can solve the problems that these racial issues, if you will, I don't think we can solve it with BLM. I think instead we solve it by returning to God, you know, and returning to treating each other as though we were, and indeed we are, made in God's image, every single one of us, you know. So that's how we deal with this issue. We have to return to godliness.
Sam, thank you for joining us on the Removing Barriers podcast. It's always great to have you on.
MCG, Jay, it's always good.
All right,
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. To get a hold of us, to support this podcast, or to learn more about removing barriers, go to removingbarriers.net. This has been the Removing Barriers podcast. We attempted to remove barriers so that we all can have a clear view of the cross.